but it was the Father's Day massacre. It breaks my heart because this village has two military outposts, and a military outpost and a police outpost right on either side of the village. We warned them. They basically went, well, we've got these military outposts right here. We're fine. Surely they're going to do something. And the attack came in, and it was late at night. The Nigerian government did nothing. And both of these outposts, they just stayed where they were. They didn't dispatch anybody, even when people were calling and asking for help. And the result was 500 houses burnt down, over 280 Christians either burnt alive or killed by machetes or shot.
Hey everyone, Steve here at the Living Enviado podcast, and Happy New Year. This is our first episode for 2026, but I want to talk about what happened 2 weeks ago. President Trump bombed an ISIS camp in Nigeria, and you may be wondering, why Nigeria? Well, we're going to talk about that today because it's something that's been happening for over 20 years. 20 years what's been happening to Christians there, and it's barbaric. And we're going to talk about that with someone from Iowa who's got firsthand knowledge on the ground of what's happening to Christians and how they're being slaughtered. But before I get into that, I want to ask you a question. Do you believe in what we're doing here on this podcast? Do you support what we're doing? Kind of support in terms of, yes, I love it kind of thing, not in the sense that you give money for it. But do you support it? Do you believe in it? If you do, I want to encourage you. Go to our website at livingenviado.com, go to our merch store and pick out something and buy it. Because when you buy something off our merch store, you support this podcast and what we're doing. Now, I've got a couple of mugs behind me. We've got t-shirts and hoodies and things like that on the website. But I want to highlight this cup. This symbol right here is the Arabic letter N, as in the word Nazarene, which represents Christian. This is a symbol that was given to Christians in the Middle East by ISIS to mock them. But instead, it became a global symbol for the persecuted church around the world. On the backside, we've got Matthew 5, verse 10. Blessed are the persecuted. And the reason I'm highlighting this is, yes, if you buy this, it supports the podcast. We can continue going. At the same time, and even more importantly, sometimes when we think of things or we don't think of things or when something's on in front of us, it's kind of like the out of sight, out of mind scenario. When this is in our cupboard and we pull it out to put coffee, tea, or hot water. Yes, hot water, because I lived in China, and yes, drinking hot water is a thing, and it's what I do every morning. So whether you put hot water or coffee in this, it's a reminder to pray for the persecuted, and in this case, the Nigerians. So pick up a cup, pick up a t-shirt, pick up something, support our podcast, and pray for the persecuted. Now, without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Pastor Sam Jones from Equipping the Persecuted. Well, Sam, thank you for joining me today on this conversation about Nigeria. And, how I got connected with you, I guess was about a week ago. I came across a Facebook post from the ministry you're connected to, Equipping the Persecuted. And I read through that, and of course I was thinking, and then I came across a news article about something, and then you have the whole thing about Trump, President Trump striking the ISIS groups in Nigeria. Everything was just moving very quickly. So I decided to take a chance and reach out to see if someone with the organization would be willing to speak to me. So thank you for joining me today. I just want to get into it because I think the article I read, and I looked it up again today, was something about, I guess, someone with your organization had issued a warning about imminent attacks. And then, a few days later, there was another attack. And we're going to get into was another attack because this is not new. But there was another attack that happened this month, just before Christmas. And then, of course, Christmas Day, you have the strikes against ISIS and all that stuff. But why don't you just tell me, I guess, start a little bit about what you guys do at the Equipping the Persecuted, and then get into what happened recently that kind of started this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, Steve. It's a privilege to be on here to discuss this with you and to go over what the Lord is doing and everything that's going on, specifically in Nigeria, because we do need to hear as the body of Christ what's happening, even over clear in Nigeria. But a little bit about Equipping the Persecuted. So Equipping the Persecuted came to be in late 2019, which was not an ideal time necessarily to start a mission. Our founder, Judd Saul, started it there in 2019. So while it was ironic, while a lot of missionaries were going from Nigeria early 2020 back to the United States, being called back, he was jumping into it to go help the the persecuted Christians. So it was just a little bit different in our framing. But he had been going over to Nigeria for a little over a decade at that point, and it was doing different, really just different mission work. He's a filmmaker by trade, so not necessarily the normal route to get into missions. And he was helping out a mission, but he kept seeing the problem of there are these persecuted Christians that are right in the middle belt of Nigeria. They're being attacked constantly by Muslims that are coming down from the north in really trying to inflict jihad there. And he was going, is there anything that's happening? Now, of course, there was aid that was being given in certain things, but nobody was really looking at how do we stop the persecution from a Christian perspective, and that's really kind of the difference of equipping the persecuted than a lot of other missions. And I don't say that to be bad towards other missions. I'm just saying that as a distinction as to what we do and how we do things a little bit different. So we do a lot of the things that you think of when it comes to missions. We're gospel centered. And so we're preaching the word of God while we're out there. We have an orphanage. We have a couple of internally displaced person schools for children there who basically an internally displaced person is a refugee inside your own country. So there's a Islamic attack that happens, and the government says, okay, you've survived this attack. We're going to take you and move you a couple hundred kilometers away with just the clothes on your back, if you're lucky. And we're just going to leave you there and say, okay, here's a plot of land. Good luck. And so we've started a couple of schools there to help facilitate the education of the children that are left in these internally displaced person camps. But then also we support widows. But probably the uniqueness of our ministry is in some of the things that we've done in order to try to stop and to divert these terrorist attacks that are happening. And so one of the things is we put out alarm towers. So I'm from the Midwest here in Iowa, the great state, suffering through a blizzard right now. Always fun to go to Nigeria and to tell the Nigerians, hey, it's snowing back where I'm at home. And they're like, snow, what is that? But we've put up these alarm towers, which are essentially tornado sirens that when an attack comes, they go off. But and it scares the terrorists. It also alerts people to go and to get to safety. Another thing that we've done is we have a rapid response team that responds within 48 hours to attacks, that goes and gives trauma care, medical care, and we come in and we give we either pay for the medical needs or whatnot. We also help rebuild and supply food after these attacks when possible. But another arm of the ministry that we have that has been unique, and probably where you saw this article, I believe, was from truthnigeria.com. And we started truthnigeria.com because the media works different in Nigeria. So in America, pretty much anybody is a journalist at this point, and you're recording it. It's on Facebook or something like that. And of course, we've got legacy media, you've got independent media, you've got all this kind of media. But in Nigeria, there's really only an official story if the government calls a press conference. And so the government will call a press conference, and then they will, or sometimes, a lot of times, they won't call a press conference. And so there will be no story then that will be reported in the media. But if the government calls a press conference, they'll tell people the talking points. And of course, then the journalists report what the government gives, which a lot of times it's either Islamic influenced or completely Islamic controlled, which means that we're not really getting the full real story as to what goes out. So we saw this problem and we decided to step in and to create Truth Nigeria. And we found just some really brave Christian independent journalists to go and to send out on the ground. And they're risking their lives. They've been arrested. They've been shot at. They've had all this kinds of true persecution that really comes in a hot, contested way. But they're going and getting the stories, getting the word out so that people can actually hear what's going on. And we give them that outlet at truthnigeria.com to go and to blast that out throughout, all the world, really, so that people can see what's actually happening from eyewitness accounts and hear that story. And that has allowed us to really shed light on what's going on in Nigeria, because in Nigeria, the persecution is just incredible. There's over 7,000. We're probably really approaching 8,000. I haven't heard an updated number yet. We'll get that at the end of the year. But 8,000, 7,000 to 8,000 persecution deaths or martyrdoms in Nigeria this year. Just to give your listeners an example of what's happening in Nigeria, 20 years ago, it was 70% Christian, and today it's under 50% Christian, not because there's a religious lack of religious fervor. In fact, if you go to Nigeria, there's a huge fervor for religion, both Islamic religion and Christian religion. They're very much a religious people. It's not atheism or secularism that's taking over, but it is a systemic and systematic jihad and genocide that's happening there in Nigeria, where Christians are being killed, targeted and killed, just one attack right after another. But that probably gets us a little bit of a talking point. You probably have 150 questions after all that I said there.
I definitely have a lot of questions. I do want to point out, I really love this. What do you call it? Okay, I have it written here. The alarm towers. Kind of,
Yeah.
growing up in Texas, living in Texas for so long, hearing the tornado sirens, how that was normal. They were probably, I mean, they were everywhere, especially now. But I can only imagine that's pretty cool that you guys were able to set some of those up to warn of what's happening right now, and just get the word out that's going on. I am curious. Well, Mitch, just talk about the warning that happened recently by Judge Saul, and then the
Mhm.
attack that happened right before Christmas, just to give them kind of a recent event that happened.
Like I said, we got people on the ground, so they know what's happening and what's going on. And we've had about a 90% effective rate. I think it's 89%, but we're right there in that ballpark of 90% of accuracy rate. And we've put out over 100 alerts, and this most recent one was right before Christmas. The Fulani ethnic militia were gathering, and it was very clear we're going to take a very similar route to what they did in last year over Black Christmas, where they had just horrific attacks. And so we saw this coming, and we put this alert out that, hey, this is happening. We need someone to do something. And when we do that, it's an alert both that goes out in a public way, and we're getting word out to those villages and cities and towns that are in the way of harm, that also to the American people, to the world to see this. We put it out publicly. And then we also do alert the Nigerian government. And our hope is that, one, people will heed this alarm and they will get to safety. We've seen that multiple times. Thousands of lives, we believe, have been saved directly through that. But also, we were hoping that the Nigerian government would step up and actually stop this attack, to intervene, to do what they're supposed to do, to protect the innocent, and to punish the wicked, is what governments are supposed to do. Now, of course, they didn't do anything in exactly where we predicted these attacks would happen. From seeing the routes that it looked like they were going to be taking, they attacked exactly in those places, and it's one of those where it was an unfortunate thing that there was a right prediction that was there. And the thing, so the one that really comes to my mind, this one is recent in a sense of this year. It's not recent in a sense of this Christmas season, but it was the Father's Day massacre, and it was in Yellow, Nigeria. The one that just it breaks my heart, because Yellow, this village has two military outposts, and a military outpost and a police outpost right on either side of the village. And we gave this alarm, we gave this alert, we warned them. they basically went, well, we've got these military outposts right here. We're fine. Surely they're going to do something. And the attack came in, and it was late at night. The Nigerian government did nothing. And both of these outposts, they just stayed where they were. They didn't dispatch anybody, even when people were calling and asking for help. And the result was 500 houses burnt down, and over 280 Christians either burnt alive or killed by machetes or shot in the streets as they're trying to flee from their houses that were burning down. And we see these things, unfortunately, no, they're not all to that magnitude of 280 deaths. A lot of times it's 50 deaths here, 30 deaths there, 100 deaths here, things of that nature. It's an attack after an attack after an attack, where it's a little attack, big attack, medium-sized attack constantly. But we see these kinds of things happen just constantly in Nigeria.
So as I said earlier, this isn't like a new thing that's happening in Nigeria. And as you implicated, it's been going on for quite some time, really for years, I guess.
Yeah, about 20 years.
About 20 years.
9/11, actually 9/11 was the first official jihad attack that they had. It was on the same day that we had 9/11 here.
Okay, so I'm curious. You made the comment about the media. So you have Truth Nigeria. Is it .com or .org?
.com for Truth Nigeria.
Okay, so truthnigeria.com. And you were talking about the media inside Nigeria that's only official when it comes out through the government, but you said that it's either Islamically controlled or influenced. Is that correct? Why is that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's one of the things that we're really trying to work on, because what has basically happened in Nigeria, like I said, 20 years ago, it was 70% Christian. Right now, it's slightly under Islam, but it's about 48% Christian. Islam is, slightly over 50% there. In Nigeria, it's close to that 50-50. And the problem is that in Nigeria, the vast majority of the posture that's taken place is that Christians have said and been taught, let's avoid politics because politics is dirty, it's worldly, and we're going to stay out of politics. Now, with that, what's ended up happening is that they vacated a lot of positions. There are still some Christian politicians, but a lot of times it's kind of Christian in name only in some certain circumstances, a lot of circumstances, or it's Muslim dominated. And those who are Christian in name only, it's more cultural Christianity, and they give way to the greater political influence of Islam. I'm not saying that there are no good Christian politicians over there, but just speaking in as a generalization with these rules. And so what ends up happening is basically either have a Muslim-controlled political system, or the Christians who go, well, we have a vested interest to go with the Muslim regime here, even if they're going to keep the Christian in name only in order to get elected, essentially, is what happens. One of the things that we're really working on is we've got a pastors conference where we have a network of over 1,000 pastors where we come in and we try to train in just biblical worldview. Simple things like teaching self-defense is biblical through the idea of Nehemiah building a wall with a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other. It's a defensive posture, not an aggressive posture. That's something that we do need to make clear. But self-defense is okay. God may call you to be a martyr, but self-defense is something that is biblical, found within a biblical worldview. Politics, we should be looking for young Nehemiahs. We should be looking for young Zerubbabels and raising them up and anchoring them in the Word of God so that they might rule in justice, and looking at getting them in positions where we're empowering them to fulfill their calling. Things of that nature. That's another thing that we try to focus in on as well.
So I'm curious about the 48%. So you said that previously in the past, 70% Christian in Nigeria, roughly about 50% today. Because one of the places I go to in the Middle East, 100 years ago, it was the area I go to was about 95% Christian. And today it's less than 1% in just 100 years. And there are a couple of churches there. They're very, outspoken, vocal. They're very prominent. So, Christianity is not completely foreign to the people, but somehow it just made this dramatic shift from being 95% Christian in just one city to less than 1%. So I'm curious about how you flip from 70% down to less than 50.
Yes, so it's right now it's through the attacks, but then also
Mhm.
in the Bible it tells us in Galatians that the law is a tutor that brings us to Christ. And just to speak a little bit about the nature of laws, it says in Psalm 19 7, the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. There's a nature of laws, and this is getting a little philosophical, but I think it's important for people to understand this. Laws by nature teach cultures. That's what they do. And Islam unapologetically brings in Sharia law. They bring it in. It's part of a forcing that happens. They're trying to subjugate people into that law, and it really ends up strangling people out. And we can see that happening in Nigeria as people start converting as they're being taught to have these laws. This last year, I was there in Nigeria during Ramadan. I'm not sure if that was necessarily the time that you should plan on going to Nigeria if you're planning on going there. But it was amazing to see the commitment as there were cars just lined up. I mean, we got stuck in traffic jams because you would have Muslims that are just pulling over, right, just stopping right in the middle of the highway to get out and to go and to pray. The laws are tutoring them, they're teaching them, they're moving them and shaping them, forming them and molding them in order to fit to the Muslim ideology, that Islamic religion and ideology. And it really does form a cultural habit and pattern inside of a culture, and really kind of constrains cultures, and I believe really squeezes them into becoming at least cultural Muslims.
I mean, I get it. I understand why these things happen, and I do want to go back to the Father Day massacre, as you called it. But before I get there, because of what you just said, I'm curious. You had talked about some of the politicians being Christian in name only, because when I travel to the Middle East, the local believers like to say there are Christians and then there are believers. Every believer is a Christian, but not every Christian is a believer. The concept is it doesn't matter what you call yourself. I can call myself anything I want. It doesn't make it true. So I'm curious because I do have friends in Nigeria that are Nigerian, and I know that there
Hmm.
is an assertive effort to mobilize Nigerian Christians in the missions world, probably from the outside of that belt that you're talking about that's being targeted by the terrorists. How are Christians, believers who are biblically sound, they're seeking to be faithful disciples, and how are they responding to this? Are they engaged in this? I don't know the answer. I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but I am curious just what the church in general is doing, or how some of them are involved. I hope that helps you understand what my question is. Obviously, outsiders can't do everything, but insiders have to be engaged somehow. So what are they doing that you've experienced?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question, and um, uh, just a little bit so people can understand Nigeria a little bit too, just on the geography. In northern Nigeria, it's pretty much completely Muslim, or predominantly Muslim. And then in that middle belt, that's where there's a lot of clash happening between the Christians and the Muslim as Islam comes down. And then southern Nigeria is predominantly Christian. Just so people kind of get that understanding. But there has been a great response, and that's been the goal of equipping the persecuted. Is that our goal isn't to come in and to do the work of the church, but rather to bolster the work of the church. So our mission, we have a small American staff that does, predominantly we do fundraising. We have some other efforts where we're helping equip and things like that, like with the pastors conference. We bring over some for medical missions, things like that. But our team is predominantly Muslims directly from the church. And they're in, or excuse me, not Muslims, Nigerians directly from the church. That would have been very confusing. And we've got a staff of over 150 that are Nigerians that are on the ground, and they're working. And what we found is that in Nigeria, it's not an issue of a lack of Christians or a lack of ability, but sometimes it's just there might be some training that needs to happen, or there might be simply awareness and financial help that needs to happen in order to accomplish a lot of the goals. And I believe we're able to accomplish it through the body of Christ, even greater because God has placed that body of Christ there. He's given them gifts. He's given them abilities. He's given them skills that he wants them to use right where he planted them. And because of that, we've been able to see just incredible success in seeing people being reached for the gospel, people being receiving aid and being helped, and just incredible leaps and bounds in some of these things where I would say the Nigerian church is maybe deficient in some of the worldview areas where we might be strong in the American church. But man, every time I go to Nigeria, I tell you, I come away learning much more than I'm sure that I end up teaching, because you get to see people who are completely devoted to Christ. I mean, I've seen people sat down and talked with widows who their husbands were pastors who were targeted, martyred for Christ. Horrific things happened to them, and yet these widows have the joy of the Lord. They are committed to Christ. They don't have bitterness, and they are seeking to see the salvation of souls. They're seeking to help other widows and orphans. They turn around and they ask me, "How can I pray for you?" And I mean, that's one of the most humbling experiences that you can ever have. So I hope that I'm not portraying that the Nigerian church is weak in a sense, but rather they might lack something that we have in the United States. And I certainly think the United States lacks something greatly that the Nigerian church has.
I love what you're talking about with the widows. You know, when people want to know what I guess true joy is like, it's like, just come with me to the Middle East, come with me to
Yeah.
wherever I travel, and just meet some believers who are in difficult situations, and you see how they live. I mean, one of the places I go to in the Middle East, I love taking people with me. I love letting them just sit down with the believers and just get to know. And we might be going, like you do, to do some training. They've invited us to do, whether it be youth ministry training or leadership training or something to that effect. But I always make a point that they get to sit down with them and learn from them, and just hear about their life, and then watch how they're responding, because I haven't met one person who's walked away from that living room that we meet in and didn't walk away changed. Because I mean, I remember in China when I first started going, and you meet these people and you think, gosh, their life is so hard, and you know, how could anyone live like that? But then you see smiles on their face, and you hear joy coming out of their conversation. You hear believers just praising God in the midst of struggle, or even believers saying, God has put me here in this environment for a reason. And it had nothing to do with, I'm a Christian, so I'm obligated to go to a less persecuted area. Obviously, some do. You know, even Paul the Apostle ran at times. You know, he didn't always just stay put, but there were times he did. And there was times they just pressed in and pressed forward. And so I think for me, you know, I have friends that love famous pastors, and they're usually American. Okay, let's be honest with that. They typically are American, maybe British, but the ones I tend to look to are those who are like the people you're talking about. To me, they tend to be the ones that like, oh, I want to be careful in saying this. Like, I want to be like them, but I'm not like wishing persecution on myself or anyone for that matter, but it's just the attitude that they have. You know, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, we do go there, we have something to contribute. It's not just because we're American doesn't mean we don't have anything to contribute to what is going on around the world, but we have to go with the equal understanding that we have something to learn from them. And
Yep.
we have things that we need to look at them and let them teach us. I think when we come together, as you said, as the body of Christ, that's when things really work together. So I mentioned I wanted to kind of backtrack a little bit to the Father's Day massacre, not really going into the details because you already talked about that, but just highlighting it again because Christmas Day, President Trump, struck some ISIS locations, I guess, some of those groups who were attacking the Christians over this period of time. And I know there's been a lot of outspoken people lately. And I guess in the last month or two, there's been a little bit more, I don't want to use the word pressure, but maybe just trying to influence President Trump to act, since I guess a lot of people feel the Nigerian government's not doing enough. And then there was, I think it started a month or two ago, and I do not know the pastor's name, but the pastor who was basically, for a brief, it seems like a very, very brief moment in the U.S., Nigeria was the center of attention. And it was that pastor that was standing over a dead body, crying out for help, crying out for, either the U.S. doing something or someone doing something to step up and help them. Like, do you know that pastor by chance?
Yeah, Pastor Ezekiel is a friend of the mission. He is a very bold pastor there. And was, I mean, he was standing over the graves of Christians, just calling out for help.
What I know the U.S. got involved for a day. I don't know, what the plan is, that they're going to do anything else after this. There's not much being said on this side, at least not that I'm hearing. Well, did it help them? I mean, what do the believers there want the outside help? Like, what are they outside of the pastor Ezekiel? Like, what are they asking for?
Yeah, I would say the overwhelming sense that I've gotten from the pastors there and the believers in Nigeria is that they do want help. Sometimes it depends a little bit. There's a little different view as to how people want help there, but that is something that they definitely do want. The one concern with what happened there on Christmas Day that I've seen is that the attack that was done, it was specifically targeting the North and trying to target what President Trump called ISIS, which or Boko Haram. And so while the ideology is the same, it comes basically, you could go Al Qaeda to ISIS to African ISIS to Boko Haram, but actually the group that's doing the most persecution right now in Nigeria, and this is one of the things that we've really tried to be intentional about and try to put, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but it's the only word that really comes to mind. Pressure to get the American government to recognize and say is that it's the Fulani ethnic militia, and that certainly doesn't have as simple of a ring or what is to saying ISIS to it, but that's really what we need of a stopping of the Fulani ethnic militia, because what's also happening is that the Fulani, which are predominantly a Muslim tribe, they come in and they're also cattle herdsmen. They come in and they attack the Christians who are there in these villages. So they're predominantly farmers at this time. And then the official narrative comes out that it's a farmer-herder conflict, or it's a tribal conflict as to what's happening. And the problem is that it's not. And so the Nigerian government will tend to hide behind that narrative. And so if we're only focused in on ISIS or Boko Haram, while certainly those groups are absolutely no good, it's the same ideology behind them as with the Fulani ethnic militia. The problem comes out is that, or the thing that we're concerned about is that we'll go and say, okay, yep, we're going to stand up against Boko Haram and ISIS while the attacks continue, just under the name of herder farmer conflicts or tribal conflicts. And so that's kind of the one concern that we have with what's happening right now. To get real technical on it, but I do think that it is a good thing for those attacks to kind of come in to put pressure on the Nigerian government, because ultimately America's not going to be able to stop through force these attacks. We're just not going to be able to. That's not a realistic outcome for what would happen, and the amount of force that would need to happen in order to do that would be it would be horrific in my mind. It would be going to war with Nigeria essentially, which I don't think would be good for anybody. And so the real goal is to get the Nigerian government to provoke them to actually do their job. They have the ability to stop these attacks and to actually intercede for their people. They're just simply not doing it.
I mean, that's sad. I mean, it's really sad to hear because it's obviously been in the news for a while. I mean, to some degree. I mean, there's like CBN and well, news outlets like that that are Truth Nigeria that are putting the information out there. And of course, the mainstream isn't touching on it as much. There was just that brief moment because of the pastor. I mean, it kind of tugs at your heart when you see something like that. When you're standing over dead bodies, it gets the attention. But then it dies away because there's other things in the news now, and I think people have forgotten about Nigeria, which is partly why I wanted to do this interview, because I know you guys are working hard to keep this in the forefront of people's minds so they don't forget. Obviously, there's other things to think about too, but we don't want to forget, because then I think it becomes a bigger issue in the long run if we just set it aside as saying, when you say, how do you say it? Fulani and ethnic militia?
Yep, Fulani ethnic militia.
Fulani ethnic. I mean, before you even talked about the herding and the farming, my first thought was that just sounds like an internal issue. Like you use that word, and I can see, like, if you throw that word out there, it's just a tribal conflict. It happens all over the world. Just let them fight it out, and we'll move on, like a schoolyard fist fight or something. And it's not really that, because it's been intentional, systematic attacks on Christians for, as you said, over 20 years. And then you mentioned you don't even know the official numbers yet, because we're just nearing the end of 2025, but it could be close to 8,000 or more. That's a lot of people when you're talking about 8,000 lives in just 1 year. And I think, what's the kind of the total overall? I know the number's pretty high.
This is an interesting question, because it's extremely high when you start to look at it. And those 8,000 deaths, for people to understand this, those are just the direct deaths that come. So these are direct through attack. But what ends up happening is you have people who are removed from their villages, moved into these IDP or internally displaced person camps, and then they starve to death there. Some of them they die from poor hygiene and medical, not because they're not because they're doing something wrong, but because they're just dropped off on a piece of land randomly that may or may not have water at all. We've had to dig some wells simply to give these IDP camps clean water, that they didn't have to go and walk a half a mile or a mile in order to get to have that. And so when you start to look at that, it's really an uncountable number of people that have died and passed away through this when it comes to the indirect attacks. But I mean, we're in the six figures. I mean, this is just an incredible amount of death and persecution that's happened there in Nigeria.
Wow. I mean, just when you said six figures, and I hadn't even, and honestly, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I hadn't thought about the camps and just the deaths that, it's like anything. Governments want to say, okay, the problem exists, so let's throw some numbers out. So let's try to, reduce the numbers as much as possible. Let's ignore this side of it, because it's all related to the attacks. In the end, the displaced would not be displaced had the attacks never happened. And I've seen refugee camps. They're not great places to live.
And there's 3 million displaced, internally displaced persons in Nigeria. 3 million.
I mean, that's more than half of my state. I mean, that's we're like 5.5 million in South Carolina. I mean, 3 million, I can't even imagine. It is mind-boggling when we don't see it, but it is real. And you're right. You can't create a refugee camp that has all the necessities in it, and you can't create them fast enough, and you can't build the infrastructure fast enough, because it's happening so quickly. Where I live, we were talking before we started recording that I don't live in like a tiny town, but it's not a big city either. And what we've seen in 12 years since living here is pretty dramatic in terms of the population and traffic. And a lot of people who are born and raised here are complaining about all the traffic and infrastructure and the growth. And to some degree, it's warranted, because our infrastructure isn't keeping up. And we're complaining about first world problems in terms of infrastructure. It's like crowded roads, but we still have electricity. We still have clean water. We still have sanitation. We still have people who pick up our trash. We still have all these services at our disposal at any time we want it. And we've got places to even, we can go dump stuff for free so we're not littering our yards and our communities. And so we're complaining about this problem, but these people are exponentially in a worse situation. When the Syrians left Syria and all these one of the refugee areas we would go to, that we still go to, had the largest UN refugee camp at the time because of the civil war in Syria. The situation was awful. And even those who were able to leave the camp and get a home, let's just say a normal apartment, what we would call a normal apartment, they still didn't have access to a lot of clean water just because of where they're at. There's no, you don't want to drink or even filter the running water. So you have to get water delivered, and they can't afford to have water delivered. And, it becomes a crisis for them very quickly. As overwhelmed as some people probably feel just listening to the reality on the ground, what can Christians do? What can Christians outside of Nigeria do beyond just, organizations like Equipping the Persecuted or other groups that may be? What can we do?
About four things that I really ask people to do. The first one is obvious. It's pray. Should be obvious as Christians. We have to pray. We often, I think, in Christianity, we get to a point where we say, I'd rather do something for God, but we don't want to pray to the Lord. And we often forget that it is the hand of God that moves through prayer. It's what he has designed, that he moves in those ways. So we can never underestimate prayer, and we need to become a praying people again. The second thing is an active. If you want to get your hands on something and do something, contact your senators, your U.S. senators, to affirm Mark Walker for ambassador. Right now, it's not ambassador of Nigeria, but it's ambassador of religious freedom. Right now, that seat is sitting vacant, and that's really causing a big problem, because that would be the position where the ambassador is getting into the administration and actually talking about what's happening. And he's been appointed, but he's just not been confirmed. And so it would be very helpful for this situation, probably for persecution around the world, to get Mark Walker confirmed there as an ambassador. So if you would encourage your senators, your U.S. senators, to confirm Mark Walker. And then, of course, giving to Equipping the Persecuted at equippingthepersecuted.org. That would be, something that if you partnered with us financially, your money does go directly to Nigeria. We've got ground, and it is something that really helps out with that. But the fourth one, and this is one that people don't think about, but one of the biggest things that we're fighting today is just getting word out. And so I always ask people when I go on a podcast, when I do an interview, to take the link that you're watching this on and to share it with 5 of your friends. Just text it to them, email it to them, share this on your Facebook, but pick 5 friends and share this video too, because when you do that, more people are going to see, which means that the Church of Christ is going to be activated. More people are going to contact the senator. More people are going to pray. And potentially more people are going to give. But the big thing that we need to see, and we need in the United States, is we need people to know about what's going on. We need them to see what's happening in Nigeria, because I believe that's what God is going to use to move people's hearts, to convict them, so that they will step up for their brothers and sisters in Christ there in Nigeria.
And I think, and you're right about that, because oftentimes when we hear about things happening in faraway places, it's not clicking unless we've got some experience over there, or we have to hear it over and over. And so, yeah, they probably heard about the pastor. They probably heard about what President Trump did. They probably heard some things, but the more they hear about it, the more likely many of them will begin to step up and say, okay, I need to say something. I need to say, you're talking about Mark Walker needs to be affirmed or confirmed as the ambassador for religious freedom. We need the right people in place. To be honest, I think a lot of people might think a position like that isn't very helpful. Like, what's the point? They're just a government official. But in reality, you get the right person in there and a lot can be done. They have a lot of influence and a lot of potential to speak to heads of states in many places that,
Yes.
you and I might never have the opportunity to be able to do that. But you
Right.
do get the right person. And, I know a guy named Bob Roberts, who is a pastor in Texas, and he does a lot of that stuff. He actually gets in front of heads of states, and he's able to talk about persecution and things like that. And he's known previous ambassadors in that position, and they have done a lot of good. So I would agree with that. And of course, everyone go to the Equipping the Persecuted website, equippingthepersecuted.org, if I'm correct,
Correct.
or truthnigeria.com. Go to those, find ways that you can give and get involved with what they're doing to help. Pray, of course, pray. Pray's like fuel. I call it prayer is the fuel of a car. You've got to have the whole car to make things work. But if you don't have the fuel, the car's not going anywhere. Be praying for them, follow them. I know they have a newsletter on their website if you want to get that, and you can follow along with what's going on. Of course, their Facebook page and all those things. You can keep up to date with them. And I know I saw Judd Saul is doing a lot of interviews on different media networks, so you can find them there as well. So, Sam, thank you for taking the time to join me today and explaining what's going on in Nigeria. And I really do hope that enough people watch this, and I hope it helps.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and God bless you in your ministry.
Now, as we bring this to a close, I just want to thank you for listening or watching. I hope what Pastor Sam Jones talked about, what we conversed about, was helpful in your understanding of what is happening in Nigeria with Christians, how they're being persecuted, but also how, as he talked about the women who are just expressing so much joy, and also this pastor who's just being bold and living out his faith, not just talking about his faith within Christian circles, but speaking up and doing something about it. And of course, the amazing work that Pastor Jones and their ministry, Equipping the Persecuted, are doing in that area of the world. And of course, there's so much like these stories in other parts of the world. But as we come to a close, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. Please leave a favorable rating. And please, if you want to support us, go to our storefront, our merch store, get a mug. That mug right there, right behind me. Enjoy some coffee. Pray for the persecuted, advocate for the persecuted, and give. Give these things as a gift. That will help us, and it will also help us advance this message that we're trying to proclaim. Anyways, have a happy new year, everyone. Thank you for listening, watching, and please, as Pastor Sam Jones says, share this with 5 people. 5 people. That's it. Share it with 5 people. Help us expand our reach. And as you do that, don't forget to be like that pastor in Nigeria. Live bold, live courageous, and live Enviado.